Hey lovelies, come and spend a rainy day with me in Rye. It is Saturday the 19th and I think I'm just going to have a wander around. I know there's a National Trust property in Rye, so I think I'm just going to have a look about. It is slightly drizzly, there was like a storm last night, so hopefully it's not going to rain too bad. I have got my coat just in case. Although I've driven through Rye, I've never actually visited, so I was really excited for this day. And I got there at about 11 o'clock, but parking was really full, so I was lucky to get a space. I love all these beautiful little shops, they're so unique and characteristic, and I saw so many dogs this day, which was really sweet. I started to head up Mermaid Street, which is really steep actually, and the cobblestones are quite treacherous on your feet. I did see some people in heels. I think that maybe they were there for a wedding, which would be so stunning because Rye's beautiful. However, not the easiest to walk up these kind of roads. I was wearing my Vans this day and I could actually feel the stones through the bottom, so I was walking on this tiny bit of pavement at the side. I just did a bit of house spotting. There's so many beautiful and really strange houses on this road, and I love these pink beautiful flowers. I kept thinking about the people that lived in these houses. They must get so frustrated with the amount of tourists and people taking photos. However, I did see a few people come out of their houses and they actually didn't mind at all. So that was quite nice. Although it had been drizzly the day before, luckily at this point it was quite dry, and I loved this house. So it was called the house opposite, and it was opposite the Mermaid Inn, which was quite funny in itself, but it had a beautiful door and windows, and I think this was where horse and carts went through. A lot of these houses are really old and quite quirky. And I got to Lamb House. So this is a National Trust property. It has been the home of many authors, including Henry James and E.F. Benson, and I went in for free with my membership card. Inside of the house, actually, in comparison to some National Trust places I've been, was quite understated. However, it was really beautiful and the downstairs rooms were really warm and kind of made for entertainment. I spoke to one of the volunteers and she said that it was kind of the place for literary meetups. So, for example, Virginia Woolf, before she was married, so she was Virginia Standen, she used to visit. Rudyard Kipling, they've had the King visit, which I think is George I. When I was there, I learnt that this house has the largest open space in Rye for the garden, which, if you know Rye, it's quite unusual to have a garden so big, so I spent quite a lot of time looking at that a little bit later on. And I didn't quite realise how many books Henry James and E.F. Benson had written, and they were really inspired by their time in this house. Along the walls of the hallway were all of these pencil portraits of authors or kind of literary people that had visited, and I found it so interesting. This was what looks like the dining room. Some of the rooms were fairly small, but the hallways were quite big. It was really interesting. I quite liked the shade of bluey green on the walls. It was quite calming. Now, this statue, I'm not quite sure what it was, but it was kind of scary. And these little cat photographs were beautiful and they were all around the house. So here are the old-fashioned photos, and as you can see, it looks pretty similar to what it does now. It did have a long banquet hall and a lot more outdoor buildings, but they were bombed in an air raid. I think it was roughly World War One, and they were never rebuilt. This garden was so beautiful, and something quite strange about it was even though you were in quite a built up area and a lot of the gardens were brick walled, it felt really immersive, almost like a jungle. There were loads of plants and little secretive pathways that were really interesting, and you'll see a little bit later on. I did a lot of exploring and I spent quite a lot of time outside. There were just so many varieties of flowers, so many pathways, and I loved these arched lattice fences. The National Trust volunteers working on the garden this year obviously had a really good yield. So I know some people have really been struggling with growing fruit and veg because of the heat. However, some of these plants were absolutely flourishing. You'll see the onions were huge, the courgettes, and loads of huge berries. These little pathways were very mossy and slippery because we had a storm the night before, so I was really going slowly not to fall over. And there were a lot more outbuildings, but like I mentioned before, they were bombed in an air raid. I do think the National Trust is hoping to rebuild some of those, but it's something that takes a lot of time to renovate. As you can see, the overhead canopies were just gorgeous. Despite there being a brick wall there, I felt like I was in some kind of foresty jungle. It was just absolutely beautiful and quite strange, these little secret pathways. I thought the house had such a beautiful view from behind. It had like a chimney going through the top, which was really pretty. These lilies were gorgeous. They were huge. There were these little gravestones, I think for Henry James's dogs. And it was quite interesting because actually upstairs I read that Henry James was in the garden with someone from the church, and he actually believes he saw a supernatural figure. And a lot of his writing, including The Turn of the Screw, were inspired by this home. I really liked this flower. I got super close and the camera did such a good job. It looked so interesting. Now this was the telephone room. So Henry James actually installed the first telephone in Rye. And something really interesting was this telephone room was open to use of the public. Loads of people were kind of in and out of here, and it was really, really interesting. And another cute little cat painting. Now this bathroom, I was not in here for very long, and I'm going to be honest, there was a really weird feeling in the room. It was quite small and contained and quite claustrophobic, and I don't know why I felt the way I did, but I quickly left. And there's a beautiful typewriter and letter desks in this room. Now this is some original writing. I love how the manuscript is so messy. I don't know about you, but I really struggle reading handwriting. I think maybe it's just me, but yeah, it was quite difficult. Now this is the King's room. So King George I actually visited the Lamb house when it was owned by the family of Lamb. And this was really interesting because although the bed and curtains were quite grand, the room was quite empty apart from that. An amazing view up to, I believe it's St Mary's Church, and I thought it was quite strange, this robe laid out. So, something you may not know is lots and lots of authors lived in the Lamb house. Now, they all wrote ghost stories about experiences they had had, and I found it really strange because a lot of the time, the authors who moved in didn't actually previously write any ghost stories. They kind of wrote comedies or non-fiction, but they were all driven and inspired by something in the house to write ghost stories. Now, that really creeped me out. They had an exhibition here, it's called Ghost Written, and I highly, highly recommend you look into the history of the Lamb house. Supposedly it is haunted. There were lots of artefacts, especially from Henry James, less so from E.F. Benson. Something I did notice is there was a lot less original artifacts than, for example, in the Batemans that I went to the other week. And I did speak to the volunteer, and I believe that the last person to live here actually had a bit of a furniture sale, even though she wasn't meant to, because she said that a lot of the furniture was haunted and she just wanted out. And so they are doing recalls, and they are trying to find more of the original furniture and original artifacts from this house. The last author to live in this house was Rue McGodden. And something I didn't know, in 2024, Camilla actually visited the property. I loved this little fish jug. I wish I had bought it and I didn't. Shops in Rye are so quirky. I think it's maybe a seaside thing. And you definitely see it, for example, in Hastings Old Town, St Leonard's. And this is normally a harbour. It is normally absolutely full to the brim of water, but it wasn't. It was just so dry. I loved these little sheep. Then went up Mint Lane. Now, Mint Lane is one of the main pathways into the town centre. There are a lot of little shops and, again, more beautiful houses. There are so many little pubs, restaurants, and they are just beautiful. It seems like something out of a book. Now, of course, it wouldn't be a visit if I didn't go to the bookshop, and I loved that they had a whole shelf for Lamb House authors. I thought that was really cool. And this shop was quite small, but it had so many books, and actually quite a few books that I had never heard of, never seen in, say, Waterstones or W.H. Smith before. I really hope you enjoyed this video. This little seagull was sat there the whole time, and next week join me as I go to Monk's house, which was Virginia and her husband Leonard Wolf's writing retreat. Bye bye.